Linda.
And let me try and sort of address Dan's question and also sort of tie in a bigger picture about what's happening to benefits. The best example is actually the United States. The United States in the next 20 years is going to run, it's going to borrow $20 trillion. That's a third of the world economy at present. And basically what's happening is they are going to, this is on the premise, they're actually going to be able to bring down some of the structural deficit within the next 10 years. But then in a decade's time, the amount of entitlement spending is going to push borrowing up again because of the retirement of the baby boomers. So this is how imminent, actually, the whole entitlement issue is in looking at the fiscal position of our governments. So I think just to sort of caricature what the major parties are likely to say next week, the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable, I know that there is some rumor today that he might be brought into a hung parliament type of government as the Treasury spokesman. He's probably, in his own personal capacity, laid out the broadest range of things he would do. And as I said, my caricature version is that everything is on the table to be cut under the windows. Nothing is sacred. And I think what the Tories so far have done is very similar to the government in that they have begun to set out some principles. So most of the reduction will come in terms of cuts in public spending, not so much on tax rises, which fits with their overall philosophy. So they'll do things like cut Whitehall by a third. But like the government, they haven't really gone further than that. With an election coming up, I don't think anyone expects any party to do so. And so I think when we look at what's going to happen in terms of the fiscal position, there's probably a couple of competing things that we have to keep in mind. One is, of course, we have to bring the deficit down. Even by having the deficit over the next parliament, that will still mean we are substantially above the 3% fiscal deficit of the Maastricht Treaty, for instance, just as a guidance of what's sustainable in the Eurozone. And now, given that our growth rate, our trend growth rate, is only about 2.5%, when you compare the interest on our debt relative to our growth rate, the interest on our debt at the moment is actually higher. It's just about what it is in terms of our growth rate. So if you think about you're paying 5% interest and you're growing at 3%, if there's 2% inflation, then your debt interest payments are growing at the same rate as the growth of your economy, then your debt is sustainable. It's called a sustainable deficit rule. If growth is severely hampered by this financial crisis because we've lost the biggest source of our revenue, our growth is going to be lower, and the bigger the debt, the higher the borrowing costs, then very quickly you can see why British debt is going to, started from being the lowest in the OECD to becoming one of the highest in just a few years' time. So, this all comes down to credibility, which affects interest rates and the cost of borrowing. And I think the parties really differ on this point. The Conservatives obviously believe they have to be credible to start talking about cuts now to bring down the cost of borrowing. And they also believe that you and I are rational, so we know that we tax rises in the future, so if government doesn't cut today, we'll just cut back. It's called Ricardian equivalence. And of course, Labour is not so concerned about this issue and believes we should go for growth, boost the growth rate in order to make this debt sustainable. And I think that's about the best we're going to get out of these parties until the beginning of May.
Thanks very much.